But first of all, I'm going to kick off on the documentary, or so-called documentary, of Keith Richard, which I saw on BBC Two last Friday night at 9 o'clock. It was appalling.
This is the thing about his youth in Dartford.
Right? How often do you get the chance to sit down with Keith Richard for a couple of hours and ask him about his life?
Yes.
Not very often.
Not very often.
Because the man
and
is
that was kind of how it was sold, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. The man is all over the world. He's a mega rock star. He's got many interests in life. When is he in London? When is he going to sit down? When has he got an hour to speak to you, or 2 hours? Because a documentary like the one I saw would have taken, I reckon, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours of footage, which you compressed down into what he did.
Spent about 4 or 5 months doing it, because it was directed by Julian Temple, I think, wasn't it?
Julian Temple?
Yeah, it was that kind of very arty sort of film
director. That's him, you're absolutely right, yeah, I was just about to say that. Now, the point of the story is this, that I couldn't understand why they made it or what it was about. Keith Richards is sitting there literally looking like Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, upon whom apparently Johnny Depp based the character on Keith Richards.
Correct.
So there's all this kind of, lips and, he's clutching a cigarette in his hand and he sort of curls his sort of bent fingers around the cigarette and puts it in and out of his mouth and he chuckles a lot, almost to himself, really, relaying these stories. But the problem was that it was all about him growing up in Dartford. He was born in 1943. But he was going on about how much he remembers of the war.
Right.
Now, he said, for instance, that when he became...
And you do struggle to think that in terms of what he remembers in any event, from anything, through his life, it must be a bit of a struggle.
I don't think he remembers falling out of the tree in Australia or anything like that, because, that was fairly recently. But anyway, the point of the story is... I had a look afterwards and to find out when the Luftwaffe bombing campaign ended against London, the East End, the Blitz. That was in 1943 when he was born.
Right.
After that, the German Air Force had been smashed to bits, and Germany was falling apart.
I must admit, I did watch
the
it as
D-Day
well.
invasion was a year later, so there wasn't a lot of bombing going on.
Well, also, I don't remember anything from when I was 2, do you?
Well, I don't either. So he's born in 43. Well, he's only 1 in 43 to 44 when the last bombs dropped. But anyway, he said years later, whenever I walked down a hotel corridor when we were on tour, if there was another hotel door open and somebody was watching a war film, and I heard the sirens go off,
That doesn't sound too much like a siren.
I thought it sounded great like a siren. He'd say that the shiver would go up the back of his neck and his hair would stand on end.
Right.
And I'm thinking... How come?
Why
if he was 1,
exactly.
he wouldn't have realised what the siren was about, even if he could hear it,
Unless it was some kind of Pavlovian response.
Exactly. So then, they interject all this Path newsreel footage of kids dancing in the streets, of people in dance halls post-war, of people celebrating in Trafalgar Square, VE Day and all that.
So there's no footage of him as a child?
No footage whatsoever. There's one picture, one still picture, of him as a child, and he looked a bit like the young Keith Richard. Well, he was the young Keith Richard.
Well, in fact, that's not a coincidence, is it?
Exactly. But what I'm saying is, it was all completely irrelevant rubbish, because he was only 1. He was only 1.5 or 2 when VE Day happened.
But presumably he went all the way up through his youth, did it?
Well, hang on. Let me tell you, this is the amazing thing. So in the whole of an hour, it was, I was in the choir at school when I was 6, and he's sucking on this cigarette, you know what I mean, like, nice, isn't it, and then
I heard the bit about when he was talking about how he beat up the bully, and then he was cool. And I listened to it and I thought, I don't believe that story. It's like one of your stories.
Well, no, my story's all true. I became a protector for the other kids. If we have a kid, I became a protector. I look after them. I started my cigarette. And all this kind of stuff. Anyway, this long, boring, rambling, sort of non-information. It was real non-information stuff. And the only shot you're getting of Keith Richard, right, is sitting there, face to camera. I don't even know what he was sitting on. Didn't show the chair. Got a sort of like a towel wrapped around his head. A sort of the bandana type thing he wears, but it's a very large bandana. And there was no attempt to take him to Dartford to point out that, well, actually, that's where we live, but I got bombed by Hitler.
Oh, so he wasn't even walking around the street?
He wasn't walking around the street. He wasn't in Dartford. He was in a closed room, and he was looking straight into camera, relating this story. And I watched this and I kept thinking, I'm going to turn over, this is boring, but it's got to get better, and this is boring, I'm going to turn over, it's got to get better. It never did. And then...
Did you watch it all the way to the end?
Well, this is the point. I thought, I wonder how long this is scheduled for, because I could see it was going up to 1 hour on the clock. So I thought it must be an hour and a half at least, because we haven't got anywhere yet. And then he said, he says, you know what, he says, when I was 10, of course, when I was 10, I met Mick, he says, and then he said, completely contradictory, who I've known since he was 4. And then the credits rolled up.
A bit mixed up.
No. And then the credits rolled up, and that was the end.
Bizarre.
That was it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
So you're saying it's not worth revisiting this on the old iPlayer?
Not under any circumstances. I mean, I'd rather stick my head in the oven for an hour. Honestly,
really?
It was just. I just could not see the point of the whole thing.
No.
It's good a job you pointed out. It was made by some sort of Archie type director guy, because it must have been, Keith Richards from another angle or something, you know what I mean?
But it was very highly trailed, and I think a lot of people would have watched it and gone, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Or Keith Richards in a daydream or something like that, or whatever. But no great. I wanted to hear about him and Mick Jagger when they were at their worst, or their best, or whatever you want to say, know.
I think the truth of the matter is he had quite a normal kind of middle class upbringing.
Normal middle class upbringing. They showed pictures of prefab houses being built in Dartford after the Germans had bombed a lot of the houses and all that. But it was rubbish. And what an opportunity to lose, to have Keith Richards for all that time. And why on earth couldn't he have told us about the girlfriends that he and Mick Jagger shared? Because they did. It's legendary. It's not a secret.
Marianne
Faithfull and all this kind of stuff. And for some unknown reason, he didn't want to talk about anything, or they didn't want to talk about anything, except when he was 6.
Yeah.
And very odd. Anyway,
very strange.
That's by the by. Now,